Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. Thank you all. Deborah, thank you. Thank you all very, very much. That was very uplifting for someone who brought their eldest to their first day of college yesterday. In the late 1980s, I met Aretha Franklin on the stage of Carnegie Hall after a rehearsal. She was there to see Ella Fitzgerald. I went up to Miss Fitzgerald thinking she was girly in character because that's how she always seems when she's singing. She was in a wheelchair. And as I approached her to shake her hand and introduce myself, I said, Miss Fitzgerald, it's such an honor to meet you. And she held her hand up and she said, I know who you are. She said, good luck, baby. I know what you're trying to do. This is going to be very difficult for you. She didn't smile. I kept looking at her, waiting for her to be, so we could have a good auntie moment. She kept her face the way it was, and she just nodded and hugged me and patted me on my back. I only thought I understood what she was saying back then. Now, after years of witnessing from my own generation's standpoint, the failed civil rights movement, failed public education system, failed jobs and equality programs, and even more devastating, a successful youth culture movement based on separating kids from the objectives of their parents in order to sell things to a coveted, naive group of consumers. I understand what she was talking about. We're in a state of desperate dysfunction, and we seem to not know where we are. I have the advantage of going around the country almost nonstop for 40 years. Never have I been in a time when so many teachers come to me and say, please talk about the mental health crisis with our kids. Every county, every district, every state, it seems like actually we don't know who exactly is we. In the 1970s, my father was always the only person in the barbershop arguing for universal humanism. Well, this wasn't the time for that. Everybody had their dashikis and afros, and this was our first time to tell white folks how we really felt about what was happening out here. I can hear my daddy right now amidst the chorus of we this and we that and we and us. He would conclude, after presenting his counter-arguments to the big we, the only we I recognize is someone who shows up to solve a problem with me. Leaving the barbershop, my brother Branford and I were always embarrassed. Man, you can't talk this kind of stuff in the barbershop. You messed the whole vibe up with all this philosophical mumbo jumbo. People don't want to hear all of that. And him, son, you address the problem in front of you, not the one being discussed to avoid the real issue. In the America of that time, the problem always seemed to be how to separate others from their potential through enforcing a system of inferiority based on their religion, their ability to buy things, and for us in the South, most importantly, the color of their skin. It was ridiculous, but it was so real. We presented a concert with the fantastic Japanese pianist and composer Toshiko Akiyoshi. Toshiko Akiyoshi. Toshiko's 93, and she conducted us with unbelievable verve and feeling. One of her songs was called The Long Yellow Road. In introducing that song, she said, I came here in the late 1950s from Japan, and I was, of course, the only woman in a lot of these spaces. She said, but everywhere I went, everything was a color. And I thought to myself, man, these people care a lot about colors. So I wrote this song, The Long Yellow Road. Well, I grew up in a sectarian universe in a small Louisiana town between the second set of railroad tracks and the Mississippi River. Well, there was great food, a good time in the poetic glow of New Orleans culture, the romance of Southern easiness, and also all the prejudice, ignorance, and hatred you would ever need to know, and that's even before you went over to the white side. I was once in a car accident with a friend of mine, a great bassist named Elton Heron. And we were young, 21, 23 years old, solving all the problems of the world at every conversation. As we stood outside the highway waiting for the police to arrive at the scene of the accident, he looked at me and he said, "You do realize that if everyone in the world died and you and I were the only two people left, there would not be one less drop of ignorance and stupidity and foolishness." And we both started to laugh. It led me to my most favorite prayer to say over meals. Dear Lord, thank you for this food. Please help us. We're surrounded by ignorance, especially when we're alone. In either case, my kids love that one. In any case, that irrational way of life and the systems that supported it needed to be defended and bolstered at all cost. So anything that justified it was given more space and time. Now, those beliefs and actions that challenged our Southern way of life were strongly discouraged and relentlessly attacked, and it didn't matter how trivial it was. Jazz was certainly one of those things. It was a cliche in New Orleans culture, as celebrated as our food, but it was far too mouthy to receive the same investment. Jazz, you see, it was messy. It was connected to other persons. And it was also born to communicate a mythology of equality, not exactly a Southern thought. But by the 70s, the music had been reduced to a straw-hatted nostalgia on Bourbon Street to be shouted over by tourists having a boozy good time. Or for black folks, it was instrumental funk tunes that you could nod your head to while pretending to be deep. The most powerful purposes of the music were and remain largely unknown. But because my father was a jazz musician who wanted us to know about it, we all understood that it was at least something you needed to know about. Even the most optimistic and naive of us in this room today recognize that this is a very difficult time for our democracy. It's a period of hyper-capitalism, hyper-anxiety, and hyper-sectarianism. Young from old, women from men, all types of religious and racial divisions, sexuality, everything is exploitable and is present at the click of a button. Man, if you're just looking at a football game on a Saturday, a college football game, the feed on your computer allows you to become a part of a contagion of hostility printed by some unknown someone's post. One incendiary comment and we're off to the races. Pretty soon the score was 17 to 9, and the game is an afterthought. We're talking about somebody mad at somebody somewhere for something that they did, and come to find out the person who writes it is not even from America. Damn. Jazz is a refutation of the sectarian constructs used to inflame irrational passions in order to divide and conquer. You see, jazz is the result of the hybridization of cultures, and as such, it is a symbiotic unifier. Jazz pioneer Jelly Roll Morton spoke to Alan Lomax on the egalitarian nature of this music at its inception. He detailed the facts of who played and why. Jelly said, New Orleans was the stomping grounds for all of the greatest pianists in the country. We had Spanish, we had colored, we had white, we had Frenchmen, we had Americans, we had them from all parts of the world because there were more jobs for pianists than any other 10 places in the world. The sporting houses needed professors, and we had so many different styles that whenever you came to New Orleans, it wouldn't make any difference that you just came from Paris or any part of England, Europe, or any place. Whatever your tunes were over there, we played them in New Orleans, probably better than you. Here, that's what Jelly said. Here, Jelly has highlighted the principal antidote for sectarian ignorance: familiarity through contact, and the construction of a mutual experience through realizing and sharing common objectives. Through jazz, people were free to embrace the individuality of others, and they were able to express that freedom in the creation of an international library of tunes that were played nightly. Miss Christina Proenza-Coles wrote an excellent book entitled American Founders: How People of African Descent Established Freedom in the New World. Here's her riffing on that subject. The history recounted here pertains not only to Afro-Americans, it is the history of all Americans. Racial categories are the products of politics and culture, not biology and nature. The idea that there are discrete organic categories of black people and white people has been revealed by history and science to be a total fiction. American history is not black or white, free or slave, it is both. We are both. And this realization will help us to better understand our past and present. Individuals of African descent were not consistently victims or heroes. They were Americans, navigating particular cultures and contexts with individual motives, allegiances, ambiguities, and concerns. What this panoply of historical actors had in common was that slavery and the racial oppression that it generated was a powerful orientation to the ideologies of liberty and justice. What unites the disparate endeavors of Afro-Americans, individuals from different epochs and distinctive regions, each with particular bearings and circumstances, was that their major loyalty was not necessarily to a place or a people, but to a principle, the principle of freedom. Jazz is the pursuit of a collective freedom. To use it for sectarian purposes would be like punching water. The piece we're going to play this week, All Rise, was intended to bring large and disparate forces together in pursuit of a common understanding. We are and have been together in much, much more than we are apart. There was more work done on the outline than on the piece itself. And the piece has about 850,000 notes. I'm not exaggerating. The outline took me 6 months. The piece took 4 months to write. To figure out how can you get all these different people with all different understandings, knowledge, balances, how can you get them to play anything together? And the conclusion was find things that they already have done together that they just don't know, hey, we did this together. One of the greatest pieces in American music that every band kid knows, if you play in an orchestra, you play it. If you play in a concert band, you play it. If you play in a marching band, you play it. It's at the most favorite Christmas concert of the year is Sleigh Ride. It's more stuff that brings us together in Sleigh Ride than any damn piece of music except the blues. In the late 1980s, I was playing a concert in Detroit, and backstage was the principal conductor of the New York Philharmonic, Kurt Mazur. He had his son, Ken David, who was a trumpeter of about 11 or 12 years old. I met his son, as I meet all the young trumpet players, hugged him, gave him a lot of love and respect, talked about playing our instrument, practicing a routine, And Mr. Mazur looked at me and he said, "Friend, will you write a piece for the New York Philharmonic?" I started to laugh. I said, "Man, I've never written for a big band. I'm certainly not going to write anything for the New York Philharmonic." I said, "Man, no way in the world I'm going to ever do that." So because we were jazz at Lincoln Center, on the campus of Lincoln Center, and he was the New York Philharmonic, and of course I would go to their concerts, I would see him on the campus. Every time I saw this man, he would tell me the same thing: "Friend, are you still afraid to write for the New York Philharmonic?" So it got on my nerves. At that time, they had one of the greatest trumpet players ever. Phil Smith was principal trumpet. I always went to hear Phil play big pieces, Mile of Five, Pictures at an Exhibition, Brandenburg Concerto, anything that had great trumpet. You knew it was going to be great because Phil was great. On my way to see Phil and say, "Man, you sounded good," there he was: "Friend, are you still afraid to write for the New York Philharmonic?" So throughout the 1990s, I determined I would try to figure out how to write for the New York Philharmonic. I had not taken composition classes. How can I write for violins and violas? I know we have it in American lexicon. How can I not write the contemporary music that critics seems to like, but I hate? How can I figure out something that's melodic, that has American objectives? How can I? I wrote a string quartet. I wrote a piece based on some of Stravinsky's music just to be able to sit next to a bassoonist. Guy ended up being one of my greatest friends in the world, Milan Turkovic, great genius of bassoon. How can I develop the technology? How could I learn to write for big band? How can I learn how to deal with larger forces? I started to develop that vocabulary. By the time we got to the mid or late 90s, I still would see Mazur: "Friend, are you still afraid to write for the New York Philharmonic?" Finally, about 1998, I said, "Okay, I think I can write for the New York Philharmonic." He said, "Okay, friend, meet me such and such time." I went to his office. We sat down, and I'm ready to meet with what he would like me to do, what I could do for the New York Philharmonic. I had my notebook of music, which I take to. He looked at me and he said, "Friend, I was a Nazi soldier." Okay, I never heard a person say that. So the room was completely silent then. He had my attention. He said, "I had been a member of Hitler Youth." He said, "Of course, if you were in Germany at that time, you would be a member of Hitler Youth." He said, "Why do we not do the things we were trying to do when Leonard Bernstein was here, in the traditions of bringing aspects of American vernacular music to the symphonic orchestra, and why do we have such segregation in your country?" I was not prepared for him to come down that road. So I just looked at him like, "Okay." I said, that's a problem, Maestro." He said, "Friend, I will ask you a question. If a man sleeps with his neighbor's wife, in 1 week, everyone in the village knows it has happened, do you think it's possible to kill millions of people and no one know about it?" Everyone knew. Everyone. Friend, you think erroneously that this cannot happen in your country. You're going down that road. I want you to write a piece that will allow us all to be together and to come together. This is more important than you think. I'll give you the New York Philharmonic for an entire evening, write a long piece, ambitious, and it will be right before the turn into the new millennium. It's with a group of pieces that we are commissioning. People have different objectives. This is what I would like you to do. Are you afraid to do this? I said, "No, Maestro. I might not be able to do it, but I'm not afraid to do it." With this piece, I had specific challenges. One was the importance of a personal and collective mythology for meaning. That means things that we all agree on. Fundamentals like you have to drink water to survive. You're young, you get older, you get old, and then people talk about you as a memory. The earth is spinning and circling. From those fundamental thoughts, I began to construct the form of the piece. I figured the most fundamental form in American music and probably in the world is the blues. So I structured it in the form of a blues that is also the form of our progression through life. The blues has 12 bars. That's Missouri right there, calling. He still wants to know if I'm afraid. It's 4 bars of what we call the 1 chord, 4 bars of what we call the 4 chord to the 1 chord, which you will know as an amen cadence. And then the last 4 bars are the 5 chord, the 4 chord, and the 1 chord. So you see it goes 1 chord, then 2 chords, then 3 chords. It goes, now those 3 chords happen to be the first intervals discovered by Pythagoras. And it's also the pentatonic scale of all Eastern music. And it's many other things. So I separated into these 3 sections, and each section of All Rise represents different moments in the progression of experiences that punctuate our lives. It is a personal and communal progression, meaning that we all go through these things with no dispute. So the first 4 movements are: 1, we're born in joy. In most instances, it's some type of joy when we're born. 2, we play. You ever see a group of kids play with a truck as an airplane? A building has hair. The association of things and the element of play. 3, we fall in love the first time, and it's naive. And 4, we get full of ourselves. That's the first 4 movements. We end being full of ourselves. I think I might be the best looking person, the greatest. Damn, everything is going so well. Nothing. Hey, what are people talking about? This is hard. This is easy out here. The second 4 movements are about tribulation and the quest for maturity that comes from the arrogance exhibited in the last of those first 4. A fall from grace of some kind and a begging for forgiveness, save us. That's the 5th movement. The 6th is attempting to come to a realization of what we have done to participate in our downfall. It's called cried, shouted, then sung. Because you cry at first, then you're angry and you curse something out, and then the last thing you can do is, you got to sing about it. That's the 6th movement. Then the 7th movement is when you come to an understanding, the grace that comes with redemption through humility. Now, this is a progression that we all have had to undergo in some way. And when we get to certain ages, perhaps we're still undergoing them. I had my 4th kid, I was 48. I was not married. My father never commented on things morally. He was really a true jazz musician. He called me one day, he said, "Hey man, I heard about, how old are you?" I said, "I'm 48. He said, "Man, sometimes you run out of time to keep learning the same thing." Then he said, "Man, I want you to check out my new tune I'm writing." That was it. That was his lesson. The 8th movement is in the halls of erudition and scholarship. It's when you are welcomed back into the feeling of joy, into the feeling of grace. Many times you welcome yourself back into that. You can come out of a dark depression and you come back with an understanding, some journey, some arduous thing that you've been through. And that leads us to the last 4. And the last 4 mirror the first 4. First is a series of Latin dances that mirrors we're born in joy. Now we're reborn, but now we understand that there are people everywhere with objectives you have. We have a broader understanding. We have the flexibility of tango, the lyricism and the romance that we find, and the best of what our Spanish brothers and sisters taught us by way of the Indians and various groups that are joined in different ways in South America. The 10th movement is like the second movement. Whereas in the second movement, we're playing with stuff like we're a little kid, now we're playing with a train. And that train is taking us from one somewhere to another, who knows where, but we're having a good time. Like the third movement was about young love and inexperience, the 11th movement is the blues. It's about what happens after heartbreak. The high of the orchestra talks to the low. Male and female energy. A certain wisdom that comes with having gone through things that you truly did not want to go through and that you could not control. The beautiful thing about pain is that it is the disciplinary force. It takes you past whatever you're willing to endure to what it's telling you you're going to endure. And when you come out from it, you have another perspective. One that hopefully is less self-centered. The 12th movement is the great I Am. It is a type of Christian mythology placed in the context of Arabic music. I bring the conceptions together. All through All Rise, this is the perspective. Things that you don't think should go together actually are the same thing. When you're a musician, you play with many musicians from different cultures, you learn that one beat, you can go around the world with that beat. That's what we used to sing on when I was growing up in New Orleans. A lot of Middle Eastern music, African music, South American music. You always say, what are y'all playing? So the story gave the opportunity to find a progression that we all could understand and relate to. Each movement would require a specific perspective. Now there's a story to go with each one of these movements, but I'm not going to bore y'all with those stories. The greatest challenge of writing a piece like this was that most of the people on the stage would have no knowledge of the music I was writing or of the heroes in that style. For example, if you're in a symphonic orchestra, who are the heroes of old school country fiddling? Do you know any of them and what they played? You know who Sidney Bechet is, the great drummer Joe Jones. Have you heard the singing of Mahalia Jackson? Do you know any of the music of Duke Ellington? It goes on and on. What about the tango tradition of the great Horacio Salgán, Moisés Santos, and the Brazilian tradition? We have an almost complete ignorance of other people's traditions. Once when I was 21, I had the opportunity to record an album of Haydn, Hummel, and Mozart trumpet concertos. And I could go to what was then communist countries to use funds that the record company had blocked. They couldn't get the funds out, they had to spend them, so we'll send you to Czechoslovakia. Hey, I was happy to go to Czechoslovakia. I went to Czechoslovakia, and there were struggles with the orchestra, something was wrong. So I had to end up leaving Czechoslovakia to make the record, to go to London to make the recording. But the first night I was in what was then Czechoslovakia, I met with some young people at a jam session. It was all secret. Hey, we have a jam session, a guy plays jazz. Come here at this time. The streets were completely dark, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock. I felt like I wasn't supposed to be going wherever I was going. So it made me really want to go. Once I got there and started to talk to them, they were all my age, college-age kids with thousands of questions. It was shocking to me how much they knew about us. But what was more shocking to me was how complete my ignorance was of them and their struggle and what they were doing. I felt like a fool. sitting there listening to them talk about us and what we were doing. And it was almost like you're just listening to, they were all speaking English. And it made me understand, man, you need to find out about the world, because your knowledge is not going to take you out here with any type of understanding. I wanted this piece to embrace the world of music in that way, that might confuse someone who does not understand that these things are related, that there's snippets of little popular things like you put a sombrero on and you're Mexican, or you talk about sushi and you're Japanese, or any type of cliche things we sometimes do when attempting, not even disrespectfully, to relate to other people's cultures. The other challenge was to find the common musical language that we all speak. Similarities from the multipolar African 6/8, which is doom 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 da goom goom ka doom 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 da goom goom ka doom doom da goom 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 ka doom. See, that bottom rhythm is going doom 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 doom. 1 2 3 4. Another one is going 1 2 3 4 5 6. 1 2 3 4 5 6. Goom king kitty kitty ting go 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 ting ting tick. It seems like, but it's two polar opposite worlds that they play in to signify the balancing of equilibrium between the polarities. It's a sacred rhythm, and it's one that has infused musicians from time immemorial across all the cultures of the world. What's the similarity between the New Orleans brass band and the traditional marching band? The combination of ragtime, which is 2/4, and the fiddler's reel, which is 2/4 music. Choro, a Brazilian form that is also in 2/4. 2/4 just means tapa 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 1 2. Where swing is 4/4. They're similar, but you got to find the similarities. The challenge was to find achievements that are related, like the changing of tempos and dance movements that require constancy. Because in jazz, our music has to have a momentum through repetition. If you listen to a South American form like tango, they have 3 or 4 motives that they go between that allows them to slow down at will, or speed up at will, or play in that. They have that groove in their culture too. Then there was the construction of a melodic vocabulary that could be real. The combination of Celtic melodies and Irish folk songs and folklore, how it relates to American folk songs like Good Night Irene and The Myth of John Henry and so on. The use of New Orleans polyphony in the same sense of Baroque polyphony. We know Bach is the supreme master of polyphonic writing. Here in New Orleans, you have a group of 6 people all playing polyphonically, and it sounds like noise and good at the same time. How can you write that? The challenge was to see how these things are the same and to create a seamless tapestry of melody through different ways of playing as a form of development, not as a form of look, ma, no hands. In attempting to unite disparate and large forces, everyone has to give up something in order to achieve a greater whole. Now I'll speak to you all about some of the challenges of combining forces and dealing with instrumental families and their cross relationships. When you look at an orchestra, it's a group of families that have come together. The strings have violins, 1 and 2 up here. Violas, the disrespected group, right up in here. Cellos, everybody loves them because they can go from low to high, and the cello, oh, they play the beautiful melody. And then the basses, they play some of the time. Oh. When you get into the woodwind section, you got flutes up here, like those violins. You got your oboes getting in the way of the trumpets. You got your clarinets, who actually relate to the violas from a range standpoint, but they're much more respected because they're the cellos of the woodwind section. So you start to see these kind of familial, I like this son, but not this other one. You got your French horns, which, you know, they're really brass instruments, but they like to be the regal part of of the woodwinds because they play loud for woodwind instruments, but they're soft for brass instruments. So they go from being disrespected in the brass section to being respected as a woodwind instrument. And of course, you got your bassoons, which I have to admit, that's my favorite instrument. I don't even know why I love a bassoon. The bassoons are so... When you get to your noble and mighty and most all-important, the most significant section of the orchestra, the brass section, the brass are speaking. You have the central figure of every orchestra, the trumpets. Then you have the horns, you know, we recognize them, but they're like that cousin that we don't know about. The trombones is a group that's always angry that they didn't actually play trumpet when they were in elementary school. I didn't mean that. Like all of our trombone players in our orchestra are over 6'2" or 3", so I'm just joking, fellas. Then if you have the most lovable of all instruments, the tuba. Nobody can be mad at a tuba. And in the jazz band, we have the noble trumpets at the top where they should be, the saxophones, which cover everything from kind of the cello to the oboe range, baritone saxophone, which can be a lovable instrument when in the right capable hands. Trombones, but because they play with plunger mutes and do all kind of trick things, and they're the voice of a reverend in jazz, they have a level of respect that's far higher than the actual instrument has earned. And then you have our greatest invention, the rhythm section. The rhythm section covers everything. The bass is the judiciary. I'm stumbling on it because ours is so corrupt at this moment. The bass is the judiciary. The piano is the Congress, has all the keys, and the president is the drums. You can find a rhythm section everywhere in the world. So when writing this piece, the thing was to try to figure out how do I bring the families together. I had a chart of the orchestra I would look at it. Right now I may have this one speak to that one, and I was trying to, so many considerations, but it was designed to bring us together. Some things about the writing process. I did not really know about writing for orchestra. I had never written a real orchestral piece, so I called Peter Martins, who was the ballet master-in-chief and the artistic director of the New York City Ballet. And I asked him, can you do me a favor and let me write a ballet for y'all, which is going to be terrible, because I need to just hear the instrument. And we had worked on things, and he was such a great artist and a friend. He said, I'll program it on something innocuous. Have at it. I wrote a piece called Them Twos. Ooh, it was terrible, but I learned a lot just analyzing it. So I was in a position of having someone who would teach me how to orchestrate as we did this piece. His name is James Oliverio. He serves as the executive director of the Digital Worlds Institute at the University of Florida. I learned so much from this man. First of all, he's very funny. So we joked around all the time, referring to ourselves, oh, noble composer of rhythm and tune. I would write stuff and he would say, that's not gonna sound good. He would not write something for me. He would just say, that's not gonna sound good. Look at this. We had a chart in my house that called All Rise, the last great masterpiece of the 20th century. As we started to become increasingly tired in October and November, we started scratching words out. It became the last piece of the 20th century. And then it became the late piece of the 20th century. Then it became simply a late piece of the late 20th century. One of the tools that I found to be most indispensable in writing it is the need for humor and dance to live besides pathos and introspection as the expression of the blues in a larger context. We have to laugh and dance through tragedy to affirm our humanity. And as this time requires, I guess all times require that. What is required always is the affirmation of those values we hold most sacred, and affirmation through action. And that's what the maestro was telling me. In our time, we openly admit across the country that we're lost. And because the world is spinning, people who are lost walk in a circle. Liberty has become privilege and democracy is all about rights. The touch words trigger every side. I want, I want, I want, I want, I want. Like my mama used to tell us, we had a lot of kids in our family, and my job was washing dishes. She said, every time you eat on a dish, I want you to think about the fact that it needs to be washed by someone. And that someone is you. She was talking about balance and reasoning. The loss of balance and reasoning across the board in our democracy should be our main concern. We see sectarianism hidden into very reasoned arguments that put people at odds with their own self-interest. I don't want health care, but I lost my job, and I need it. We're feeling the true power of irrational thought and dealing with the fact that perceptions mold reality. Hey, we grew up with it in Kenton, Louisiana. Your presence made you guilty of something. And when there's the challenge of fact versus feeling, fact has a big problem. However, let's never forget that the truth has a weight and the power of momentum across millennia. Never forget the great Andrew Young told me a story about him and Martin Luther King. I asked him, man, what is the thing you remember the most? He said, man, of all the great times, he said, one night we got caught outside of our protection. He said, I don't know how we got there. He said, we were surrounded by rednecks in a very bad situation that was uncontrolled. He said, and I just said to myself, well, we're going to be a headline. He said, but that night, Martin talked to them. He said, damn, if I could remember what he told them. He said, but it was something that kept them from killing us. He said, and I understood then in that moment the power of fact. And he talked directly to them, and it shocked them. And we were able to get stuff straight so we could get out of there. And he said, it sends chills down my spine in this moment and gives me goosebumps recalling it to you because I don't really talk about it. The truth and the power of belief is always on the table. And we make powerful choices. And those choices are also a part of defining the present moment. This is a time of heated debate and fire. However, the discussion and the discord shows that all is not lost. It's not the end, because there are believers who are willing to engage in what may seem to be a waste of time. I think we need an aggressive positivity that is sometimes at odds with the concept of symbiosis. The apocalyptic, it always comes with fire and brimstone and noise, but the symbiotic comes with love and peace and welcoming. My father once called me and said, man, I'm looking at this rap video and it's so infectious because it's so aggressive. He said, why is it that they always fired up and heated about their thing, and when we talk, it's always so passive? This is going to be a struggle. I go back to what Ella Fitzgerald told me. Since I must be thinking about Aretha, I'm going to tell y'all one funny story about her. So Aretha sometimes would call me late at night, 1 o'clock, and we would sit on the phone till 2 o'clock, 2:30. And whatever we ended up talking about, she would then text me in all capitals. Oh, Marsalis, I forgot about this, blah, blah, blah. She talked in a very natural way. And she would always tell me about the history of gospel music and jazz musicians. And one night she said, I know you're wondering, why is Aretha talking about all these people? She said, well, Marsalis, that's because you're the only young person I know who knows who any of these people are. But finally, I think we have to find optimism in the fact that things are in cycles. And though we are in need of a new mythology, the examples are at hand. One shining example is the James Webb Telescope. The new mythology needs to recognize that a person in Illinois can connect with a fellow pie maker in South Africa and trade or establish some type of tie. What was only open to companies is now open to enterprising individuals, like jazz. It taught us over a century ago, this is how you bring your individuality to a group in the interest of enriching each other instead of destroying or exploiting. It's a novel but very, very old idea. You do it by doing it and by striving always to create more space for who you think is others. We actually have brothers and sisters all over the world. The actual potential in your fellow person is very dynamic. I remember telling my father, man, I run out of stuff to play. I play something, I don't have any new ideas. He just started laughing. He said, if you're looking for a new idea, just listen to the person next to you. Let's realize that AI lacks the ability to reason. It's a tool that can do a lot of things, but the greatest thing you will ever encounter in your life and the life of many, many generations to follow is the person next to you. In the words of Stanley Crouch, and this is really the main theme of All Rise, be always in pursuit. And at the end of his many emails he would send to me and to other people, he would always write VIA, via, victory is assured. I appreciate all of you coming today to hear me give some loose thoughts on what it takes to come together. It is a challenge. But the most important thing I think for us to realize is the importance of tactility. You can Zoom all you want. For some things, you got to be there. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you very much.